Chains of faith, a miracle in every step. The sun was just beginning to light the streets of the city when Elena left her small apartment. The routine was the same as always. A quick coffee, adjusting her scarf, and walking to the bus stop. She worked as a nurse at a clinic, and although she loved her profession, lately, she had felt overwhelmed. Bills were piling up, her mother was sick, and it seemed like the prayers she made every night went unanswered. That morning, as she approached the bus stop, she noticed a man sitting on the ground, covered by a tattered blanket. His gaze was lost, and his face showed deep sadness. Elena had seen him before, always in the same spot. She knew most of the passers-by avoided looking at him, afraid to get involved. A lump formed in her throat. Her heart told her she should do something, but her mind held her back. I don't even have enough for myself. How can I help someone else? She thought. The bus arrived, and Elena had to make a decision in an instant. She didn't get on. Instead, she approached the man and, without saying a word, took a bill from her pocket and placed it in his hand. It's not much, but I hope it helps in some way, she said with a kind smile. The man's eyes filled with tears. God bless you, miss. But what Elena didn't know was that this simple act of faith would change her life in ways she never imagined. Elena walked away, feeling a mix of peace and worry. She knew she needed that money, but something in her heart told her she had done the right thing. She arrived late to the clinic, expecting a reprimand from her strict supervisor, Dr. Ramirez. However, upon entering, she found an unusually calm atmosphere. Elena, just in time, said the doctor with a smile, something rare for her. We have an important visit today, so try to give your best. Elena nodded, still thinking about the man on the street. She headed to the patient room, where an older man was waiting to be seen. He wore an old coat and carried a cane. His face seemed vaguely familiar. Good morning, sir. I'm Elena, your nurse, she said kindly. The elderly man looked up and smiled. Good morning, miss. What a beautiful name. You know, someone with that same name did me a great favor this morning. Elena blinked, surprised. Really? Yes. He reminded me that there is still kindness in the world. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Could it be? She observed the man more closely. Although he was now dressed with more dignity, his gaze was the same as the one she had seen on the street just hours earlier. Are you the man from the bus stop? The elderly man smiled warmly. God works in mysterious ways, Miss Elena, and today you were his instrument. Elena felt her heart race. She had no idea what was about to unfold. Elena could barely process what was happening. How could the same man she had seen on the street that morning now be in the clinic? And even more surprisingly, he looked completely different. Clean, with a serene expression, and eyes filled with peace. But how? She asked, still not fully understanding. The elderly man placed both hands on his cane and sighed before answering. God has unexpected ways of answering prayers. Today you were an answer for me, and perhaps I am an answer for you. Elena frowned. An answer for me? The man smiled gently. You saw me at my worst and didn't pass by. Instead, you had faith, believing that a small act of kindness could make a difference. And it did. After you left, an old friend recognized me and offered help. He brought me here for a consultation, but he also reminded me of something I had forgotten long ago. My purpose. Elena felt a lump in her throat. All of this seemed unbelievable. Sir, The elderly man raised a hand, stopping her. You don't have to say anything, my child. God sees the heart, and your heart showed that, even in difficulty, you still trust in him. Elena felt tears burning in her eyes. Lately, she had doubted so much, feeling that her prayers were falling on deaf ears. And yet, that man spoke as though God had been listening to her all along. "Tell me, Elena," said the elderly man, with a look full of wisdom, "what weighs the most on your heart?" Elena hesitated, but something inside her told her to answer truthfully. "My mother is sick," she confessed with a trembling voice. "I don't have enough money to pay for proper treatment. And even though I keep praying, there are days when I feel like I can't take it anymore." The elderly man looked at her with compassion, taking her hand in his, and said in a firm voice, "God already has an answer prepared for you. Don't give up. Faith moves mountains, and you are about to see it with your own eyes." Elena didn't understand at that moment what he meant, but soon she would find out. Elena felt a chill run through her body. How could this man speak with such certainty? How could he say that God already had an answer for her? "Trust, my child," the elderly man repeated with a serene smile. "Faith is not about seeing first to believe later, but about believing even when you see nothing." Elena nodded with a lump in her throat. She didn't want to get her hopes up in vain, but something inside her told her she needed to hold on to those words. "Sir, may I ask your name?" she said softly. The elderly man smiled warmly. "My name is Tomas." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Tomas," said Elena. "I'm going to take your vital signs before you see the doctor." Tomas nodded and allowed her to do her work. His blood pressure was within normal ranges, his pulse was stable, and despite his age, he seemed to be in quite good health. When she finished, Elena gave him another smile and prepared to leave the room. "Thank you for sharing your story with me," she said before leaving. Tomas looked at her with eyes full of meaning. "Thank you for not ignoring me this morning. And remember, faith is always rewarded." Elena left the room feeling strangely relieved. Tomas' words echoed in her mind as she continued with her work. Hours later, at the end of her shift, when Elena was about to head home, Dr. Ramirez called her into her office. "Elena, can you come in for a moment?" She felt a slight nervousness as she entered, wondering if she had done something wrong. But the doctor's expression wasn't one of anger, but curiosity. "Do you know Mr. Tomas?" she asked. "I attended him today at the clinic," Elena replied. "Why do you ask?" Dr. Ramirez clasped her hands on the desk and looked at her intently before responding. "Because he just left something for you." Elena frowned. "For me?" The doctor nodded and handed her an envelope. Elena took it with trembling hands, and as she opened it, she felt her heart stop for a moment. Inside the envelope was a check for an amount large enough to cover her mother's entire treatment. Tears filled her eyes as a handwritten note fell from the envelope. "Thank you for seeing with the eyes of faith. Now it's your turn to receive. God never leaves his children helpless. With love, Tomas." Elena placed a hand over her mouth, unable to hold back the tears. God had truly heard her. Elena's hands trembled as she held the check and Tomas's note. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they weren't tears of worry or despair, but of amazement and gratitude. "Are you okay?" asked Dr. Ramirez softly. Elena took a few seconds to respond. "Yes, it's just that. This is a miracle." The doctor looked at her with curiosity. "How do you know this man?" Elena sighed, still in shock, and told her what had happened that morning. She spoke of the man sitting on the street, how she had felt the urge to help him despite her own struggles, and how he later appeared at the clinic, transformed. Dr. Ramirez fell silent for a moment. "Do you know who Mr. Tomas really is?" Elena shook her head. "His full name is Tomas Aguilera. Years ago, he owned a very successful company, but after his wife passed away, he withdrew from the world. No one knows exactly what happened, but slowly he lost everything, or at least, that's what we thought. Elena stared at her, wide-eyed. You mean, he was a businessman? Not just that, the doctor continued, but despite his retirement, he still has access to many resources. It seems he has chosen you to be blessed. Elena covered her mouth with her hand. She felt as though her heart might burst. Couldn't be a coincidence. It was God. It was proof that he had been listening all along. But I can't accept this, Elena whispered, staring at the check. The doctor smiled with understanding. What if this is the answer to your prayers? Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She had prayed for God's help, but when the answer came, she had trouble believing it. Wasn't that what Tomas had told her? Faith is not about seeing first to believe afterward, but about believing even when you see nothing. She took a deep breath and wiped away her tears. I have to see him. I have to thank him. But when she rushed out of the clinic, looking for Tomas, the elderly man was no longer there. She asked security guards, patients, and nurses, but no one knew where he had gone. It was as if he had disappeared. Elena stood at the clinic's entrance, gazing at the sky. Thank you, Lord, she whispered. Thank you for reminding me that you have never left me alone. And in her heart, she knew Tomas had been right. That night, Elena returned home with her heart still racing from everything that had happened. She sat on the edge of her bed, holding the check with trembling hands. She looked at it over and over, as if she wanted to make sure it was real. Her mother, Dona Rosa, watched her from the doorway. Despite the illness that weakened her, her gaze still reflected the same sweetness as always. Is everything okay, daughter? She asked softly. Elena lifted her gaze and, unable to hold back any longer, ran to embrace her. Mom, God has answered. Dona Rosa gently stroked her hair. God always answers, daughter. It's just that sometimes he does so in ways we don't expect. Elena pulled back a little and showed her the check. Do you remember how we prayed for a way to pay for your treatment? Today, God used a stranger to grant us this miracle. Dona Rosa took the check with trembling hands and sighed in awe. Sweetheart, this is... Elena nodded, tears in her eyes. A miracle, Mom. A real miracle. That night, they both knelt together to pray, not only to ask but also to thank. The next day, Elena went early to the clinic to begin the paperwork for her mother's treatment. While waiting at the reception, her gaze drifted to the door, hoping to see Tomas walk in. But he didn't. Days went by, and there was no trace of him. No one knew where to find him. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. Then, a week later, when Elena left the clinic after her shift, she found an envelope in her locker. She opened it curiously and found inside a small note written in the same elegant handwriting as the first letter. Don't look for me. My mission with you has ended. Now it's your turn to bring the miracle to others. Remember, faith is always rewarded. Elena pressed the note against her chest, feeling a deep warmth in her soul. God had shown her that faith wasn't just about receiving miracles. It was also about becoming a miracle for someone else, and she was ready to do it. In the following days, Elena couldn't stop thinking about Tomas and his words. Now it's your turn to bring the miracle to others. That phrase resonated in her heart with indescribable force. She had always tried to help others within her means, but now she understood that faith wasn't just about receiving. It was about giving without expecting anything in return. Her mother began the treatment thanks to Tomas's generosity, and little by little, her health started to improve. Every time she saw Dona Rosa with more energy and hope, Elena felt certain that God had placed Tomas in her path for a greater reason. One afternoon, as she was leaving the clinic after her shift, Her eyes landed on the same bus stop where she had first seen Tomas. This time, on the ground, there was another person. A woman in worn clothing, holding a small child who was sleeping in her lap. Elena felt a lump in her throat. She approached cautiously. "Good afternoon," she said softly. The woman looked up, surprised that someone was speaking to her. "Gee, good afternoon," she replied, her voice trembling. "Are you okay?" The woman sighed and lowered her gaze. "We're going through a tough time. My husband lost his job and we were evicted from our home. I have nowhere to go with my child." Elena felt her heart beat fast. It wasn't a coincidence. Couldn't be. Tomas had appeared in her life at her time of greatest need. Now it was her turn. "Wait here a moment," she said firmly. She ran to the corner cafe and bought hot food for the woman and her child. Then, she returned and sat next to them on the sidewalk. "Here, please. Eat." The woman took the package with trembling hands and eyes full of tears. "God bless you. You don't know how much we needed this." Elena smiled warmly. "I know. And believe me, God always has ways of sending help at the right moment." As she watched the woman feed her child with gratitude, Elena understood something. Helping others didn't always mean giving large sums of money. Sometimes, a small act of kindness could change someone's life, just as it had happened to her. Elena watched as the woman fed her son desperately, as if she hadn't had a bite in days. The scene reminded her of herself not long ago, when her faith wavered and she felt there was no way out. "What's your son's name?" she asked softly. The woman looked up and, with a slight tremor in her voice, replied, "His name is Matthias. He's 4 years old." Elena smiled and looked at the little boy, who was slowly waking up, rubbing his eyes with his tiny hands. "That's a beautiful name," she said. "Do you have anywhere to go tonight?" The woman lowered her gaze and shook her head. "No. We slept in a shelter last night, but today there's no space." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The night was falling fast, and the temperature was dropping. She couldn't just leave them there. Now it's your turn to carry the miracle to others. Tomas was right. God had blessed her not just to receive, but to share. She took a deep breath and, without hesitation, said, "I know a place where you can stay for a few days." The woman's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? But I don't want to inconvenience you." "It's no inconvenience," Elena reassured her. "It's the right thing to do." Minutes later, they took a taxi to Dona Rosa's house. During the ride, Elena told them about her mother and how God had sent someone to help her when she needed it most. "So, if you'll allow me, now I want to do the same for you and your son." Tears rolled down the woman's cheeks. "I don't know how to thank you." Elena took her hand warmly. "You don't have to. Just remember this. Faith holds us up in the darkest moments, and God always provides." When they arrived at the house, Dona Rosa greeted them with a warm smile, without asking any questions, as if she understood this was part of a greater plan. That night, while Matthias slept safely on a warm mattress and his mother breathed peacefully for the first time in days, Elena looked up at the starry sky and whispered, "Thank you, Lord," because now she understood that faith wasn't just about receiving miracles. It was about becoming one. The next morning, the smell of freshly baked bread filled the house. Dona Rosa, with her usual warmth, had prepared a hearty breakfast for everyone. The woman, now known as Carolina, couldn't hold back her tears as Matthias devoured his plate of food with a smile. "I don't know how to thank you," said Carolina, moved. "God really put you in my path." Elena took her hand fondly. "God always takes care of us, Carolina. Sometimes, He uses others to show us His love." After breakfast, Elena grabbed her bag and prepared to leave. I'm going to the clinic, but before I go, I want to talk about how we can help you. Carolina nodded gratefully. I just need a chance. A job. Something to start over. Elena thought for a moment. They always need cleaning staff at the clinic. It's not an easy job, but it's stable, and it would give you the chance to start again. Carolina's eyes lit up. Do you really think they'd give me a chance? I can talk to the administrator. I can't promise anything, but I'll try. Carolina nodded excitedly and took Elena's hands. Thank you, really thank you. Elena smiled. I'm just doing what someone did for me. That day, at the clinic, Elena spoke with the administrator and explained Carolina's situation. To her surprise, the response came faster than expected. We actually need someone for the afternoon shift, said the administrator. If she can come tomorrow morning, we can give her a trial. Elena's heart raced with excitement. God was working again. When she returned home and gave Carolina the news, she covered her face with her hands, sobbing with happiness. It's more than I imagined. Elena took a deep breath, feeling an indescribable peace. God hadn't just changed her life. Now he was using her to change others' lives. That night, as she prayed, she knew for certain this was just the beginning. Because faith, when lived every day, becomes a chain of miracles. The next day, Carolina showed up at the clinic in the best clothes she had, with hope on her face. Elena accompanied her to the reception, offering words of encouragement. Just be yourself. God has already opened this door for you. Carolina nodded nervously but with determination. Hours later, when Elena finished her shift, she found Carolina waiting with shining eyes and a huge smile. They gave me the job, she exclaimed, covering her mouth with her hands. Unable to believe it, Elena hugged her joyfully. I knew God wouldn't leave us alone in this. With this new beginning, Carolina was able to rent a small room for herself and Matthias. While there was still much to be done, they now had hope. Days later, when Elena passed by the same street where she had first found Tomas, she paused for a moment. She looked around, perhaps hoping to see him again, with his calm smile and wise words. But he wasn't there. However, in her heart, she felt his presence, as if he were still whispering to her. Now it's your turn to carry the miracle to others. Elena smiled and closed her eyes for a moment, lifting a prayer of gratitude. Faith wasn't just about believing in miracles. It was about being part of them. And she was ready to move forward, helping others as God had helped her. Because faith, when lived every day, never stops multiplying.